Friends, hello. My name is Ihor Havryshchak. It's Tuesday, July 29th, and let's take a look at the most important news from this crazy world. Please subscribe to YouTube 24. In the description, there is a link to my YouTube channel. We always update our analytics for you. Don't forget to like, comment on where to watch, and of course your comments, suggestions, questions in the comments are welcome. Feedback from you is important, and we want to see what you think and read, what you write, and your thoughts. Share our conversation. Let's promote Ukrainian content together and fight against Russian propaganda. What do I want to talk to you about today? The fact that Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, has reduced the ultimatum for Vladimir Putin from 50 days to 10 to 12. There is already a reaction to this from Dmitry Medvedev and others. In general, Russia is burning up, and they are threatening war against the United States. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said that Russia is at war itself and named new conditions for ending Russia's occupation war in Ukraine. Of course, we'll mention the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because British experts say there is a threat. Let's get started. The President of the United States has announced a new deadline for Russia to end its war against Ukraine. He said this at a meeting in Scotland with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Quote, "I'm going to set a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from yesterday. There is no reason to wait," Trump emphasized. Speaking about the previous 50-day ultimatum to end the war, he said he wanted to be generous, magnanimous, but he sees that there is no result. The US president added that there has been no progress in ending the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine. However, for his part, he says he does not want to do this to Russia because he loves the Russian people. His words are reported by Reuters. We quote Trump. "I spoke with Putin and it seemed we were on the way to peace. And then I said, forget about Tomai, I'm not going to talk about it. You know, this has happened too many times before and I don't like it." According to Trump, 7,000 soldiers are killed in the war between Russia and Ukraine on the front line every week. Once again, he unites the occupiers and our liberators, our heroes. He also said that in the future it will be known whether common sense will prevail and Putin will agree to the deal. There may be sanctions and secondary tariffs, and this is very important. I would also like to remind you that yesterday a trade agreement was signed between the European Union and the United States. In Russia, it was also heavily criticized by both Medvedev and Lavrov. This is disadvantageous for the Russians, because with this agreement, the US is displacing the occupiers' energy carriers and will sell its oil, gas, and other products to Europe for $730 billion. The most interesting thing is that this agreement is more of a forced one for the EU, as if no agreement had been signed in Scotland yesterday. Duties on cars from Germany, for example, would have increased by 27.5% starting August 1st. There are many more products from the European Union, but I want to focus on the automotive market. This is a victory, right? Because now there will be a 15% duty on cars from Germany. But I will remind you that before this trade war on the part of Trump Germany, the European auto industry paid only 2.7% of the duty. Now automotive giants like Volkswagen will pay $1.5 billion more per year. Of course, this is better than the almost 30% that would have to come in if the talks failed from August 1st. But what is being shouted at Russia? In response to President Trump's new ultimatum to Russian dictator Putin to stop the war, Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, wrote a very threatening message on his social network X. According to him, Trump is playing a game of ultimatums with Russia and should remember that Russia is not Israel or even Iran. Every new ultimatum is a threat and a step toward war. Not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go the way of Sleepy Joe. Medvedev was referring to Joe Biden, of course. Medvedev makes a direct threat saying, There will be a war between the US and Russia if there are ultimatums. Frankly speaking, you cannot cope with the war in Ukraine. And to threaten the US, you have already launched nuclear missiles at London and Berlin. Now you are verbally at war with the United States. Don't take on a niche that you can't handle. Country 404 is a piece of advice from us, but Medvedev's rant continued, as Republican Senator Lindsey Graham wrote the following on social media. For those who think Trump is not serious about stopping the bloody war between Russia and Ukraine, you and those you serve are about to make a sad mistake. You will soon see that Joe Biden is no longer president. Sit down at the negotiating table, and Medvedev responded to this phrase. What did he write? It's not for you or Trump to dictate when to sit down at the negotiating table. The negotiations will end, Medvedev writes, when all the goals of our military operation are achieved. Work on American first and called Lindsey Graham Grandpa. Interestingly, he calls him Grandpa, but Lindsey Graham is 2.5 years younger than Putin. It was an accident that Medvedev called his lord a grandpa. We'll see what happens. In addition to Medvedev, Lavrov is very much on fire, including because of the EU and US agreements. But among other things, he also named 2 new conditions, new old conditions, for ending the war in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has released a new list of so-called conditions that the Kremlin is setting for a peace agreement with Ukraine. Diplomats quote propaganda media in Russia. Among the Kremlin's key demands are Ukraine's official refusal to join NATO and the cessation of any further NATO expansion. According to Lavrov, Moscow considers these points to be legitimate demands. The occupier's foreign minister emphasized that NATO has already come close to Russia's borders, despite promises and signed agreements. Another key condition for Russia is the acceptance of the Russian Federation's de facto control over the occupied Ukrainian territories. These are absolutely unacceptable conditions. No one will recognize anything, so let Lavrov forget about it. There is a small nuance. They say that we will fight because NATO is coming. After the full-scale invasion, NATO came closer, Sweden and Finland. Now there will be one more member. Austria has stated that it is necessary to get rid of neutrality. And in general, everything that dictator Putin demanded is going the other way. He did not want NATO to expand, but NATO has come closer. He wanted to overthrow Ukraine, but Ukraine is defending itself. He also attacked the European Union's agreements with the United States. He particularly mentioned Ursula von der Leyen. He said of her, "Do you know what?" She then proudly, with pleasure, said that they had reached an agreement whereby European goods would come to the United States and be subject to a 15% duty, and the United States would supply its goods to Europe with 0 duties, plus 750 billion would be allocated for natural gas and nuclear energy, and by completely refusing to buy Russian energy. And Lavrov says that in this way Europe will lose its industrialization and become a vassal to the United States. Of course, everything that is not acceptable in Russia is acceptable, of course, to Europe, especially to Ukraine. In addition, Lavrov also lied about Russia fighting alone. Do you hear that? He says that it so happens that the poor Russian Federation is at war with the whole West one-on-one. Maybe we can show Lavrov the North Korean troops that were eliminated by our Ukrainian forces. Can he look at the KN-23 ballistic missile from North Korea? Or the millions of shells that North Korea provides to Russia, because they do not have their own. Or maybe let's talk about Iran and the components for these biplanes, the lion's share of which, in fact, almost all of which are made of Chinese parts. This is how Russia is fighting against the West. Here is Lavrov. About the Zaporizhzhia NPP. Russian dictator Putin may resort to nuclear terror if he is defeated on the battlefield. Zaporizhzhia NPP, seized by the Russian army, could be used as a dirty bomb. The consequences of such a scenario could be catastrophic for the whole of Europe, including Russia itself. Forbes writes about this, citing a British expert from the University of Leicester. His name is Simon Bennett. He stated that the seizure of Zaporizhzhia NPP has been one of the key levers of blackmail used by Russia against the West since the beginning of the full-scale war. Putin may order the plant to be mined in order to cause a nuclear explosion in the event of his defeat, without using strategic nuclear weapons, the expert says. Bennett believes that in the worst-case scenario, each of the 6 ZNPP reactors could be detonated remotely. This will lead to a large-scale release of radioactive materials that will spread throughout Europe, similar to Chernobyl in 1986. Then radioactive clouds reached even the United Kingdom. Such an act of nuclear blackmail could hit Russia itself, the expert says. With a constant westerly wind, radioactive contamination would easily reach Russian regions, making this scenario extremely risky for the Kremlin as well. And who in Russia would worry about the ordinary Russian people? There is a bunker. Putin will hide and wait for the ashes to settle on the territory of the Russian Federation. I think Putin doesn't care whether his Russians are dying in the war in Ukraine or dying on his territory. He doesn't care, it's just statistics for him. Bennett warned Russian operations at NPPs in Ukraine could be a rehearsal for future sabotage in NATO countries. In particular, he said, the Kremlin could involve sleeper agents in the critical infrastructure of the event who would resort to nuclear provocations or sabotage. It is a demonstration of a willingness to destroy the international security system at any cost, Bennett emphasized. And in general, if we talk about geopolitical processes, you know very well that the United States is now looking for allies to go to war with, possibly in case of a threat from China to Taiwan. So the UK is ready to fight in the Pacific Ocean if a conflict over Taiwan breaks out. This was announced by British Defence Secretary John Healey. Healey arrived in Australia, where large-scale military exercises are about to begin. In this context, journalists asked the British minister what the UK is doing to help countries like Taiwan prepare for potential escalation from China. What did Healey say? If we have to fight, Australia and the UK are countries that will fight together. We train together, and because of this, we are better able to defend ourselves together. We ensure peace through strength, and our strength comes from our allies. According to The Telegraph, this comment was the most decisive statement from a British official regarding possible participation in a future war with Taiwan. Mr. Healey noted that his words should be taken in general terms, as the UK would prefer to resolve disputes in the Indo-Pacific region through peaceful and diplomatic means. However, even with these reservations, the statement is significant, as until now, representatives of the British government have refrained from commenting on possible involvement in the Sino-Taiwanese war. We know that the British Air Force did work at one time to repel attacks on Israel, but the British Air Force does not want to close the skies over Ukraine. Everyone is ready to fight on all continents, but to literally guarantee security in the sky. Relatively speaking, the French and British, who helped the United States repel attacks on Israel, could repel missiles and drones in Ukraine. No one is saying to destroy or hit Russian positions on the front. No, it's just about protecting our skies. Is it really such a difficult political decision? The US is now actively looking for potential allies in the event of an escalation of the situation around Taiwan. They have already appealed to Japan and Australia has previously said that it has no plans to use any troops in the event of military action near Taiwan. How do our NATO partners respond? You know, their response is always one that simply provides an opportunity, encourages Russia to perhaps conduct some hybrid attacks. Because I want to tell you that on July 28th, local Lithuanian residents saw a drone flying near Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. 200 meters above Vilnius, they say it could be a Russian Gerbera, or a Shahed, as they call them. You see, an enemy drone has entered the territory of the North Atlantic Alliance. What should be the reaction of NATO countries? Definitely not the same as the Lithuanian Ministry of Defense, because their minister, Dovyl Shakaliene, suggested that a Russian-like Shahed drone spotted near Vilnius could have been flown there as a result of Ukrainian electronic warfare. She noted that so far there are no signs that the violation of Lithuanian airspace was intentional or a provocation. Since there was a large-scale attack against Ukraine at night, it was highly likely that this could have been one of the objects that got lost under the influence of Ukrainian defense. This is how NATO is responding. They say, Russia didn't attack, that's how Ukraine works. You realize that this approach unleashes the hands, and the next time, 5 drones may fly in from Russia. They may fall somewhere. Like Romanian authorities concealed the fact that an S-300 or part of a Shahd fell somewhere, the eastern flank of NATO will say, no, it must have been Ukrainians. This is how hybrid wars begin. We can attack. You see how they react. And finally, the chairman of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of Russia, Valentina Matvienko, a native of Ukraine who is under European sanctions, attended the World Conference of Parliamentary Speakers in Switzerland. Kind Switzerland decided to let Matvienko in. She justified Russia's attack on Ukraine by saying that Moscow was forced to intervene to stop the bloodshed in Donbass. She also called for telling the truth and being guided by facts, not fictional stories. Let me remind you that it was Matvienko who convened the Federation Council and allowed Putin to send troops to Ukraine on February 24, 2022. And what does Switzerland do? It says, "Welcome, Ms. Matvienko. Here is an airplane. Come and speak at the Conference of Parliamentary Speakers." Everyone is equal. We even want to hear the voice of genocidaires, the voice of terrorists. You can't keep them in isolation. This approach of a weak Europe unleashes the hands of the Russian Federation. These were the most important news on Tuesday, July 29th. Subscribe to YouTube 24 and to my YouTube channel. Actively like, comment, and share our conversation. Let's work together to promote Ukrainian language content and fight against Russian propaganda so that people like Matvienko can't set foot on European soil. Vehicles from France and Italy, Germany and Poland, the UK and Sweden are heading to serve in the Ukrainian forces. Before that, each car purchased at European auctions is delivered to the service station, where, after a full inspection and repair, it is equipped with EW systems if necessary. In dark times, bright people shine the most, those who light the way themselves. They give a little now, to have everything in the future, and that is you, our dearest.
Наші найдорожчі. Дякуємо вам за це.